Hey everyone, welcome to Hear Me Roar, the podcast with Kate Itacy. For everyone who was tuning in to Hammer Time with Nikki and Kate, welcome back. And to all of our new podcast listeners and fans, I welcome you to the show. So Nikki and I were so incredibly grateful for all the positive feedback from our Hammer Time episodes. So glad that we were able to touch people and relate to common human experiences, especially those of the female gender. I'm hoping to continue those efforts in this new revamped podcast. And I plan to speak on things that relate to so many others in an effort to entertain, enrich, and empower others with topics that I cover. So it's kind of in the same vein as my upcoming book, From National Champion to Physically Disabled Activist. In it, I share my struggles as well as my triumphs to try and be not only an example to others with disabilities, but also kind of a warning sign to those who might be venturing down the same path as I was in neglecting my health. It's so hard with women and body issues and being an athlete and, trying to excel at your career. There's a lot to juggle in this world. And I think we as females tend to spend less time on ourselves and more time trying to take care of others. So, for this bonus podcast episode, and I do say bonus because the first episode of Hear Me Roar is technically scheduled for next week. I'm going to be speaking with Angie. She's the owner of Angelina Rose Photography, an incredible wedding photography studio. We'll be talking next week about running small businesses and being females as business owners. It's hard to get out there and market and network and be more than just your career, to balance your work life and your home life. And so we'll get into a lot of those issues, get into some tips for starting your own business, and hopefully be a resource for others. I used to run and own my own law firm for 5 years before I went to Texas to work with the federal public defenders. And Angelina Rose Photography has existed for a number of years now and has been incredibly successful. So I'm excited to talk to Angie, and hopefully both her experience as well as mine can help others. So before that episode, I was kind of inspired this morning to talk about chronic pain. And I hope you'll indulge me. This is not a pity party. And it's not just for those who suffer from chronic pain, but also for those who have a loved one or perhaps interact with somebody and might not even know that they're suffering from chronic pain. I was watching an advertisement for Lady Gaga's documentary about a year or so ago, and she was telling her doctor how she loves performing and how her fans and the music really invigorate her and give her energy, but she's still dealing with this daily constant pain, and it really takes a toll on her. So this morning I was at Specialized Orthopedics. I want to give a shout out to Sean McCluskey there, who's my physical therapist, as well as everyone else there. They're incredible and very talented and knowledgeable. And so I have been going to PT as part of my recovery from my second spinal surgery. And this morning I was on a table next to a gentleman who is also suffering from chronic pain. And actually, incidentally, also had a laminectomy, which is part of the spinal surgery that I had, where they saw off part of your vertebrae in order to get access to your spine. So we were speaking this morning and talking about chronic pain, and I brought up the TV show House, which I loved and have seen a million times by now. And for those of you who haven't watched it, it's about an incredibly brilliant doctor who happens to be a prick. And a large part of that is because he is in such horrible daily debilitating pain from a botched leg surgery. So the show is about him and his team kind of cracking incurable, undiagnosable cases and figuring out what people are ailing from before they pass away. And so it made me think of that because the gentleman next to me very aptly stated that chronic pain can change your personality if you let it. And I think that's the really vital key part of that phrase, if you let it. And it's hard going through each day, each moment of your life being in pain. Your brain literally gets distracted from whatever else you're doing and reminds you constantly, hey, you're in pain. And so it can be incredibly depressing. It's given me feelings of anger and frustration and resentment towards my body. And so I think the gentleman at PT was absolutely correct that if you don't make that intentional effort, that constant effort on a daily basis to keep a better attitude and not let your struggles impact your relationships, which I think is a really tough thing. I think we all deal with that, and not just for chronic pain. If you're having a bad day, someone pissed you off at work, you kind of failed a presentation, or you flunked a quiz, or whatever the case may be, and you come home and you're pissed off, and your wife or your dad or your friend or significant other, roommate, they try and talk to you and you snap at them. We've all done it. And for those of us who are in chronic pain, I think it's harder because we have to intentionally remind ourselves, hey, even though you want to scream, shout, swear, destroy things, whatever you want to do, this should not impact your relationships, how you treat others, because they had nothing to do with creating your pain. And a lot of times they're just trying to help you or be supportive. And so I think it's really important that we all, not just those of us with chronic pain, but all of us do a little better job at kind of checking ourselves before we interact with others and make sure that our feelings about something else do not spill over onto unsuspecting, innocent bystanders. But I wanted to talk about the chronic pain because speaking with this gentleman kind of took me back to last year, or maybe about a year and a half ago now. So for those of you who don't know, I had a tumor when I was born, and by the time I was 4, it had wrapped around my spine and was pulling on it. And so the doctors had to go in and cut most of it out. I was fine for the next 28 years. I did athletics, got a full athletics scholarship to Penn State, was national champion in high school for the hammer and the weight throws. And so the back really did not affect me at all until 9 months after I moved to Texas. And I all of a sudden felt debilitating back pain and the sensation of electric shocks to the base of my spine. I developed muscle spasms, chronic fatigue, bladder, bowel, and sexual dysfunction, a lot of different symptoms. And so I went through 2.5 years of being misdiagnosed and being frustrated with the process because I tried everything. I tried opioids, which incidentally make me throw up almost instantly. I tried Lyrica, which is for diabetic neuropathy, which I also have. So I'm on the maximum dose of that, the maximum dose of an antidepressant that's supposed to help with nerve pain. I've tried other supplements. I've tried a prescribed herbal remedy, radio frequency nerve ablations, steroid injections, an epidural, a spinal cord stimulator, obviously PT, massage, acupuncture, pretty much everything you can think of. Heat pads, medicated ointments, the whole 9 yards. And I'm still working on it. I'm still, and surgery, spinal surgery, and I'm still in chronic pain. And so that's just something that I have been working on accepting in my life. And so prior to this, I have had 49 surgeries and procedures over the last 30 years. And so prior to the last 3 years, I was completely self-sufficient. Like I said, I own my own law practice, did a lot of pro bono work, a lot of advocacy work, volunteered for a mayoral electoral campaign, coached other athletes. And so I did a lot, and I think I did too much and kind of abused my body and neglected it. But the point is that I was able to go through surgeries and go through painful things and still live my daily life and do what I felt was making the biggest contribution to the world. And so when this chronic pain and the tumor retethered around my spinal cord was pulling on it again because it had grown a tail, I got really resentful and really angry at it because I had to quit my job. I had to retire based on disability. I had to go through the whole SSDI process. I lost my career, what I thought was my calling in life. I had to basically stop doing most physical activity at all, including walking. Pretty much my days were spent, and still for the most part are spent, laid up in bed most hours of most days. I have chronic fatigue, which makes my sleep cycles insane. And I'm really unable to usually plan day by day. So if I schedule a lunch, one day next week, it's a crapshoot as to whether I'll be able to make it. And I hate canceling and rescheduling on people. I hate feeling like a flake. But I've had to deal with all that. And I'm not complaining. The point of this isn't to complain. The point of this is to explain how I got to the mental state of being so angry at my body for turning me into someone who is really, at this point, almost unable to take care of herself. A few weeks ago, I passed out. I threw up and passed out on the bathroom floor for an hour. And my parents, luckily, were able to wake me up by shouting through the door. But it's a scary thing, and nobody knows why that happened. And so when you're dealing with a debilitating disease or chronic fatigue or whatever it is, and it takes away your quality of life as you've come to know it, and it takes away your independence and your ability to meaningfully contribute to society, it can be gut-wrenching. And not only that, but then you've still got the chronic, constant, daily, debilitating pain to deal with. So when the gentleman next to me was talking about not, it can change your personality if you let it, it's really easy. It would be really easy for me to go into a very depressive state and just give up. Just be so angry and resentful and pissed off to kind of become Greg House, to be that prick doctor who's just mad at the world. But I don't want that. I don't want that for myself, and I don't want that for those around me, whether it be my physical therapist that I interact with, or friends, or people at the library, or doctors, whomever I interact with, I don't want my pain to affect the relationships in my life. And I think it's really hard. And it's probably the hardest thing I've ever had to do. And it beats, powerlifting. It beats competing against the Olympic gold medalist. It beats law school, being a criminal defense attorney, everything. It's the hardest thing I've had to do in my life, hands down. And so as this was all happening, as I was losing my job and everything else, I told my husband that our next stop, which was planning to be Detroit, I would look into going to a pain support group. And I'm not a very prideful person. I am, obviously, by doing this podcast, very open and willing to share my experiences, and I'm not bashful. I'll pretty much tell you anything you want to know. So it doesn't take a lot for me to acknowledge that I need help. I mean, it did. When I was younger, it certainly did. I did not want to admit that I needed help from anyone, that I couldn't do it myself. And I felt very guilty for needing to ask others for help, as if I was taking away some part of their day or their energy or what have you. But at this point, I have no pride. I have no ego about that. So I knew that talking to others face to face in a room, talking about our similar experiences, talking about procedures that failed or worked, or, if a family member or friend said something that was hard to handle, that would make a difference. And so I came here to Rhode Island while my husband was going to an academy, a training academy, and I sought more medical care. Found out that my tumor had grown the tail and was recurring tethering of the cord, pulling on the cord. And so in that process, I was still getting progressively worse. I had some muscle weakness. And so I went to my primary care doctor and I told him my struggles. And he recommended me to a mental health professional who specializes in helping those with disabilities kind of adjust to it. And I was diagnosed with adjustment disorder. And that's hard for me to acknowledge, being a former athlete, being an attorney, being a former business owner. You do have some pride and you do want to say, like, come on, you can't suck it up. You can't just deal with the pain. And that's been my experience the last few years, is realizing that you have absolutely no idea what another person is going through, what their pain level is. I've had friends say, oh, I'm in pain, but it's got nothing compared to your pain. Well, how do we know? Maybe on a scale of 1 to 10, maybe your 4 is my 8. Maybe I experience it or I feel it and it feels worse to me than it does to you. Maybe you have a higher pain tolerance or vice versa. And so I think it's so hard when you have something that's not really quantifiable. I mean, you the number of times I've been asked on a scale of 1 to 10, how bad is the pain? It's countless. But really, it's subjective. So there's no objectively quantifiable way to measure a person's pain levels. So you really have no idea. You could be interacting with someone and they could be kind of down. And it might be that they're really struggling to even make it through the day. And so that's why I thought it was so important. So I went to this counselor, and I still see her, and she's wonderful. And she gave me a workbook to get started on. And within the first 2 pages, I knew that it was the right book for me, because it started out by saying that sometimes your family and friends will try and support you, but almost take up more energy out of you and your struggles, because you have to either soothe them, like to let them know that you're going to be okay, to comfort them, or to deal with their almost naive optimism. So, you'll get a lot of friends and family who will say, oh, you can do this. You're so brave. You're so strong. You're going to find a cure, or we're going to find something that's going to help with your pain. Your pain's going to be gone. Just stick it out. I understand it. And I'm sure if I were in their shoes, I would probably be saying the same thing to somebody else. But being the person who's experiencing this incurable, degenerative, debilitating condition, it's hard enough for me to make it through the day without having to explain to you, well, yes, I have tried acupuncture. I tried it for 4 months and it did absolutely nothing. Yes, thank you for telling me about eating more yams or taking turmeric or whatever the case may be. Suggestions or encouragement can almost be frustrating, because if you don't understand what's going on in that person's body and that person's mind, it's almost as if they're saying, you're giving up hope. You're being too pessimistic. You're not giving it your all. You're not willing to try. And I think for someone who's exhaustively, aggressively tried everything, and really hadn't come to the realization that nothing is going to really take it away for the most part, and then to know that it's degenerative, so it's only going to get worse, especially combined with my diabetes, which will only get worse as I age. It's a hard thing. And it's something that only those with similar experiences can relate to. So when I was seeing my counselor, I said, you know what, I want to see if there's a chronic pain group in Rhode Island. And at that time, it was before I found out that my tethered cord had recurred. So at that time, I thought I had an incurable nerve pain disorder called arachnoiditis. So I said, you know what, that's obscure. There's not going to be enough people. Rhode Island's a small state. Let me just look for a chronic pain group, a more general group. And I did a pretty extensive internet search and came up with nothing. I came up with a few leads, and they were invalid email addresses or out-of-date phone numbers. And so it was really strange. I mean, even my counselor didn't seem to have any recommendations or know of any support groups. And I find that hard to believe, because even though Rhode Island's small, I'm certainly not the only one in chronic pain. Clearly, by meeting this gentleman this morning in PT. And so I'm thinking of maybe, once again, and I had thought about this earlier in the year, but perhaps looking into starting a chronic pain support group. And maybe not just for those who are going through it, but also family members who don't know what to do, who feel helpless, who are trying to support their loved one or their friend and don't know just how to do it. So I wanted to know your thoughts. And you might be listening from somewhere other than Rhode Island. And obviously, I think if your area doesn't have one, that it might be a good idea to have one. And I am certainly no expert. I'm not claiming to be one. I'm not claiming to have answers. But I think sometimes being face to face with a person who's gone through the same thing you have, who can see the pain on your face, who can understand and be there for you, and even comfort you or console you with an understanding look, can be a lot more effective than online groups. And I'm not trying to bash online groups. I think they're so helpful. I found a tethered spinal cord support group on Facebook, and they've been great. Unfortunately, because it's sort of rare for it to recur, most of the people in the group were actually parents of children with tethered spinal cord, as my parents were in 1988 when we had to do the surgery. There weren't a lot of adults who had it recurring. There were a few, and it was very comforting to know it. Not, of course, not to be happy that somebody else is going through this really horrible thing, but to understand that you're not alone. And I think that's so helpful. I think that's such a huge resource in life, is not feeling like you're alone, like you're the only person who's going through a certain situation. And so as wonderful as medical professionals are, my physical therapist, my mental health counselor, I think a support group would really do at least me a lot of good. And of course, I'd like to think that it would do others some good. So I'm wondering if you guys want to give me some feedback. Let me know what you think. Do you think having a physical meeting place for a chronic pain support group, or even maybe a combined video teleconference, who knows, for people who can't get out of bed or aren't mobile. But I would really love to know what you guys think, because for me, it's been a real process. And like I said, it's been the hardest thing that I've ever had to do. So I want, as much as I've kind of had to accept and be okay with the fact that this isn't really ever going to get any better, I'm also never going to give up trying to live the best life possible. And so I don't really think at this point that I can still do something where I can plan a day out in advance and know that it's probably going to happen and I can make those plans happen. But at this point, I still want to give back. I still want to contribute to society and help others. And so that's why I wrote my book. That's why I did the podcast with Nikki. And I'm so grateful that others responded positively to it. And that's why I'm continuing on with Hear Me Roar. And so I'd love to know whether I can be helpful in any other way that I can be. Obviously not in the capacity of being a criminal defense attorney or maybe a civil rights activist anymore, but at least doing something to make others feel better, to better society, to change the way things are. So I'd love to know your thoughts. And so until next week, when I talk to Angie from Angelina Rose Photography, this is Kate Itacy on the Hear Me Roar podcast. You can check out the website at hearmeroarpodcast.com. You can email me at hearmeroarpodcast@gmail.com. You can follow the website or the podcast on Facebook, Twitter, Tumblr, Instagram, or YouTube. And just as Hammer Time was available and still is available for subscription on iTunes and Google Play, I'm going to be making this podcast, Hear Me Roar, also available on those two platforms. So I hope you'll tune in next week for my interview with Angie. Until then, I do hope that for those of you who feel like it would be a good thing or know of anyone who might benefit from meeting, if you'll reach out to me either through the website or through my social media platforms or through my email, I would love to hear from you. And I thank you all for tuning in. And I hope that we can all make each other feel more supported and better understood. And so I thank you very much, and I will talk to you guys next week. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.